It was an ordinary summer evening in Austin, the kind you don't remember until something breaks it. The heat lingered even after sunset, pressing down on the city like a second skin. I'd just gotten home from work, my shirt still damp from the walk across the parking lot. When I remembered that my car insurance card had expired, I headed back down to the garage to grab the new one from the glove box, grumbling under my breath about the bureaucracy of it all. Our garage always smelled faintly of oil and dust. Familiar. Safe. My car sat quietly, the interior still warm from the day's sun. I opened the glove box with one hand while scrolling through emails on my phone with the other. But the moment I touched the unfamiliar object inside, something shifted. It was a lighter, heavy, metal. Not the kind you pick up at a gas station, but something engraved, deliberate, matte black, with a faint scratch along the side and an inscription that stopped me cold. Mitch, 214-555-7298. I stared at it for a long time, letting the metal rest in my palm. It was warm like it had been used recently. That didn't make sense. I didn't smoke. Laura didn't smoke. Neither of us had any friends who smoked, at least not close enough to be riding in my car and stuffing things into the glove box. I turned the lighter over once, then again. My mind raced. Was it left by someone at the mechanic? A valet? But I hadn't taken the car anywhere in over a week. I was the only one who used it, except for that one time 4 days ago, when Laura borrowed it to run an errand. She hadn't mentioned anything unusual then. My first instinct was to confront her, but I hesitated. Something about the whole thing felt delicate, like if I moved too quickly, I'd knock over something fragile I didn't yet understand. That night after dinner, I casually brought it up. She didn't even blink. Oh, that? I must have given a coworker a ride to lunch last week. He smokes. Probably left it behind. The answer was smooth, polished, too easy. And she was smiling almost too much. Not like she was amused, but like someone giving a performance, hoping you wouldn't look too closely at the background. I watched her face, her eyes, the way her hand fluttered just slightly over her wine glass. It was all too perfect. I nodded, said nothing more, but a seed had been planted. Later that night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me. Her breathing was calm, unbothered. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The weight of the lighter, the name, the phone number, her response. The timeline didn't add up. Laura never gave coworkers rides. She often complained about how she hated the logistics of carpooling. And besides, if someone had left something behind in my car, why didn't she mention it the day it happened? The next morning, I Googled the phone number. No hits, no social media profiles, no LinkedIn, just an empty string of digits attached to a first name I didn't recognize. Mitch, I said it aloud, quietly. It didn't sound like anyone she worked with. Laura mostly interacted with other designers, most of them women, a few men I'd met at previous company parties. No one named Mitch had ever come up in conversation. I dropped the subject for the next few days. But it didn't leave me. Not really. That lighter sat in the drawer of my workbench, buried under screwdrivers and unused Allen wrenches. But in my mind it burned like a warning beacon. I found myself glancing at Laura when she wasn't looking, studying her face, her expressions, the way her eyes moved when she read a message on her phone. She seemed the same. At first, maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the heat was getting to me, or work stress, or just some stupid instinct misfiring like a faulty smoke detector. But something wasn't right. It wasn't about the object. It was about what it represented, something out of place, something unexplained. One afternoon, a few days later, I opened her car door on the driveway while she was inside folding laundry. Just curious, just checking. The car was spotless, too spotless, like it had just been wiped down. Dashboard gleaming, console empty. I remembered she hadn't been that meticulous about cleaning before. Not unless we were going on a road trip or driving her parents somewhere. She once joked she liked a lived-in car, a rolling extension of her creative chaos. But this? It looked reset. That same evening, I noticed her phone was face down on the counter. A new habit. Notifications used to pop up while we cooked dinner together or watched TV, harmless and bright. Now they were silent. She'd pick up her phone quickly, glance at it briefly, then tuck it away like it held a secret too delicate for air. I told myself to stop imagining things. Relationships weren't built on suspicion. We'd been married 7 years. We'd weathered career changes, a miscarriage, her father's death. We were solid. Weren't we? Still, every night I thought about that lighter. His presence felt like a dare. Like the universe had whispered in my ear, "Look closer." I didn't mention it again. Not to her. Not to anyone. I began to doubt myself for even being bothered by it. Maybe it really was just a forgettable object left behind by someone irrelevant. But if that were true, if it really didn't mean anything, why did it feel like a splinter wedged beneath my skin? And why, even as I buried it beneath tools and time, could I still feel its weight every time I walked into the garage? They say your instincts speak in whispers before they scream. This wasn't a scream. Not yet. But it was the kind of silence you hear right before the wind shifts, when the birds stop singing, and the air grows still and you realize something is coming. I didn't know what exactly, but I could feel it. And deep down, I already knew it had started. Once you start looking for patterns, they appear everywhere. Not because they suddenly exist, but because they were always there, you just stopped ignoring them. After the lighter, my eyes became sharper, my memory clearer. Small moments that once seemed forgettable now returned in vivid detail, reorganizing themselves into something coherent. Something alarming. It began with her schedule. Laura had always been disciplined about her time. She worked as a senior designer at a mid-sized agency downtown, 9 to 6, give or take. But suddenly, her routine grew inconsistent. She began going in early and staying late, often without explanation. At first, I chalked it up to a new client. She mentioned something vague about a campaign for a tech company, with last-minute demands. I didn't press her. I wanted to be supportive. But when late nights turned into overnight crunch sessions, I started keeping track. Not out of paranoia, but self-preservation. Then came the gym. Laura had never been athletic, never one to voluntarily sweat outside of hot yoga, which she attended more for the social aspect than fitness. But out of nowhere, she joined a 24-hour fitness studio. She started waking up before sunrise, leaving the house at 5:30 a.m. with an intensity that didn't match her personality. I offered to join her once. She laughed and said it was her time to disconnect. She began wearing sleeker workout gear, more form-fitting, more branded Lululemon, not the cheap cotton she used to grab from the discount rack. There was a new perfume, too, subtle but distinct, sweet but musky, not the light, floral tones she used to wear. This one lingered. I noticed it on the bedsheets on the passenger seat of her car, in the hallway near the laundry. I once caught a trace of it in our guest bathroom, which she hadn't used in years. It clung to the air like a question no one wanted to ask. Her phone became her fortress. Once, she'd leave it charging in the kitchen overnight. Now it was always by her side, even in the shower. Notifications stopped making sounds. Her messages no longer flashed on the screen. She started locking it obsessively. If I walked past her while she was texting, she'd angle the screen away, even if I wasn't looking. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was work. Maybe it was stress. Maybe I was inventing monsters in the closet because I couldn't handle silence. But then I remembered the wine night. 3 weeks before the lighter incident, Laura came home with a bottle of wine, one I'd never seen before. She poured us both a glass, said it was a gift from a coworker, someone who appreciated her feedback on a design. I remembered how flustered she was when I asked who. She brushed it off with a laugh, called it a weird guy from marketing. At the time, I didn't push it. But now, the name she didn't say, Mitch, echoed like a missing puzzle piece. I also noticed how our conversations changed. Or rather, how they stopped being conversations at all. We used to talk about everything: work, family, old dreams, random articles we read. Now, our exchanges became logistical. Dinner's in the oven. I'll be late tonight. Don't forget the plumber's coming Tuesday. It was all function, no int asterisk Macy. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd reply with one-word answers. Sometimes none at all. The mornings grew cold, even in the Texas heat. She'd get up before me, slip out of bed like a ghost. No more leaning over for a kiss on the forehead. No more playful brushes of her foot against mine beneath the covers. I started waking up to the sound of the front door closing, not her breath beside me. And when she returned in the evenings, she moved around me like I was a piece of furniture. Something that had always been there, not worth noticing anymore. I remember one Sunday vividly. We used to make pancakes together on Sundays. It was our thing. She'd mix the batter while I manned the stove, flipping each one with a dramatic flair that made her roll her eyes. But that week, she didn't even come downstairs. I waited until noon, then finally went up to check on her. She was already dressed, makeup on, spritzing perfume in the mirror. Said she was heading out to meet friends. No mention of breakfast. No apology. Just a quick exit and the scent of that new perfume in her wake. Even our fights changed by disappearing. We used to argue, sure, but even our disagreements had energy investment. Now she didn't bother engaging at all. If I voiced concern, she'd shrug, say I was overthinking. If I asked about her day, she'd deflect. It was like trying to hold a conversation with someone behind a thick pane of glass. You could see the motion, the lips moving, but none of it reached you. One afternoon, I walked past her workspace and noticed she'd changed her laptop password. A few months ago, we shared everything, passwords, calendars, even playlists. Now she had barriers, locks, secrets. I never pried, not once. But the act of changing that password spoke volumes. Not about privacy, but about exclusion. Even her laughter changed. She used to laugh with her whole face. Eyes crinkled, nose scrunched. Now her laughter was selective, guarded. I caught her once on the phone, tucked away on our back patio, laughing quietly, voice low. She ended the call quickly when I stepped outside, said it was just her friend Hannah. But the way her shoulders tensed said otherwise. I began noticing absences in her stories. Details she used to share freely now omitted. She'd go out for drinks with coworkers, but never mentioned who. She'd return late, smelling like perfume and smoke. The perfume wasn't hers. And the smoke? I couldn't remember the last time she'd even tolerated being around it. That, too, felt like someone else's scent. There were long showers, sudden bursts of energy that didn't match the rest of her day. She'd dress up to go to the grocery store, then return with only a single bag. Her receipts went missing. Our shared credit card had fewer charges. And yet, she seemed more vibrant, rested, energized. It wasn't the glow of health. It was the glow of secrecy. I wish I could say I confronted her then, that I laid out the clues like evidence on a table and demanded answers. But I didn't. I doubted myself. I didn't want to be the jealous husband who mistook independence for infidelity. So I let it brew inside me, quietly, numbly. The silence became its own companion. I found comfort in predictability, even if it came wrapped in lies. And all the while I clung to hope. Hope that I was wrong. Hope that there was an innocent explanation. Hope that the woman who once made me feel like the only person in the world still saw me at all. But deep down I knew. It wasn't just the lighter. It was the 1,000 tiny departures that came afterward. The way she had beg asterisk end disappearing. One routine, one glance, one silence at a time. There are moments in life that mark the dividing line between who you were and who you'll become. Mine came on a Thursday evening in late August, the kind of evening that clung to your skin with heat and silence. I remember because I had left the office early, an impulsive decision. I'd told my manager I had a migraine, but the truth was simpler. I needed to be home. Or maybe something in me already knew what was waiting. I stopped by a local place on the way home, picked up takeout from a little Thai restaurant we both liked. Laura hadn't mentioned plans for the evening, so I figured a quiet night in might reset whatever invisible wall had formed between us. Pad CEW for her, green curry for me. I even grabbed her favorite dessert, mango sticky rice, on a whim. I thought maybe if I reminded her of us, something might return. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. No lights on downstairs, no movement behind the windows. I remember hesitating before unlocking the door, pausing to listen. The crickets were loud. The cicadas buzzed in the background. Everything felt still. Then I heard her voice. It was faint, coming from the living room. Light, animated. She was laughing. Not the hollow chuckle she gave me lately, but the real thing. Full-throated, free. I crept forward quietly, unsure why I didn't announce myself. Maybe some part of me didn't want to interrupt whatever joy she had found. Maybe I already knew it wasn't meant for me. I rounded the corner and saw her on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, cradling a wine glass. She wore the navy sundress she used to reserve for special outings. Cinched at the waist, soft at the hem, casual but just elegant enough to say, "I want to be seen." The screen of her laptop glowed in front of her. She was on a video call. I stopped in the hallway, just out of view. I could hear her voice clearly. She was recounting a story. Something about a restaurant. Not the one we'd ever been to. Her voice was soft, almost flirty. And then she said something I'd never forget. "I couldn't stop thinking about last night. You have no idea. He has no clue. He thinks I was working late." She laughed again, quiet, conspiratorial, electric with adrenaline. It wasn't the laugh of someone who'd made a mistake. It was the laugh of someone who had crossed a line and never intended to turn back. She wasn't even hiding it. Not from him, only from me. I didn't step into the room. I didn't drop the food or shout or scream. I backed away. Slow, careful, deliberate. Like someone retreating from the edge of a cliff they hadn't realized they were standing on. I slipped out the front door as quietly as I'd come in, the Thai food still clutched in my hand. I sat in the car with the engine off for what felt like an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. What I felt was a cold, complete silence, the kind that sinks into your bones. I drove aimlessly that night. No music. No phone. Just the road and the occasional glow of gas station lights along the highway. I ended up parked by a lake outside the city, watching as the sky shifted from gold to black. The food went cold beside me, untouched. I opened the window and let the breeze hit my face. It smelled like water, like mud and night and the faint hint of cedar. I thought about the first time I met Laura. We were both fresh out of college, at a mutual friend's wedding in Dallas. She wore red that day. She hated red, she once told me, but she wore it because she wanted to stand out. She did. She always did. When she laughed, people leaned closer. When she looked at you, it felt like being chosen. I used to feel like the luckiest man in the room. That night by the lake, I realized that version of her was gone. Or maybe she'd never really existed, not in the way I believed. Maybe I had created a version of her in my mind and clung to it, even as she became someone else. Or maybe she had slowly unraveled in front of me, thread by thread, and I just didn't want to see it. When I finally returned home, it was past midnight. The house was quiet again. Laura had gone to bed. The wine glass was rinsed and resting upside down in the drying rack. The laptop was gone from the table. Everything had been reset like nothing ever happened. I placed the bag of cold takeout on the kitchen counter. I didn't wake her. I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse. I just stood there, in the dim light of the stove's digital clock, letting the silence settle around me like smoke. The next morning, she acted normal. Kissed me on the cheek, asked how I slept, mentioned something about needing to grab more toothpaste. She wore a t-shirt and jeans, hair tied up casually, like the night before hadn't happened, like she wasn't betraying the foundation of everything we had. I watched her sip her coffee and scroll through her phone. She looked peaceful, relaxed, as though nothing had changed. But everything had. I had changed. That day, I didn't go to work. I told my team I had personal matters to attend to. I spent the morning walking through the city, past the places that used to feel like ours, Zilker Park, the bookstore on South Congress, the food truck where she first told me she loved me. Each memory felt like a ghost tugging at the hem of something long dead. I began writing things down. Not just events, but feelings. The first time her phone started facing downward. The shift in perfume. The missing Sunday pancakes. The lighter. The laughter. The words she thought I'd never hear. It wasn't to gather evidence. I wasn't planning revenge. I just needed to make sense of it all, to take back control of the narrative she had hijacked. By the end of the day, I had a list, a timeline, a map of erosion. I didn't tell her I knew. I didn't ask for the truth. I didn't want to hear the version she would spin. The moment she confessed to someone else, he has no clue, was the moment she burned the bridge behind her. I wasn't chasing her across the flames. That night, when she got home, she looked surprised to see me in the kitchen. I had cooked dinner. Nothing elaborate. Just something simple: chicken, rice, vegetables. Plated mine. Hers remained untouched. She offered to help with the dishes, but I told her I already took care of it. She lingered in the doorway, watching me. I could feel her confusion. Something had shifted. I smiled politely, said I was tired, said I'd be reading in bed. She didn't follow me. I didn't expect her to. I lay in bed for hours, not reading, not sleeping, just staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of knowing sit with me. Not a burden. Not anymore. But a truth. Solid. Undeniable. There's a particular grief that comes with betrayal, not from the act itself, but from the realization that the person you trusted has become someone else in secret, and worse, that they are still pretending to be who they were. I didn't hate Laura. I didn't feel rage. I felt distance. Final. Absolute. It was the kind of knowing that didn't require confrontation. She had already told the truth, just not to me. And now that I knew, she didn't have to. After that night, something fundamental within me shifted. Not in an explosive, cinematic way, but in the quiet, irreversible manner of a door gently closing behind you. I didn't speak of what I'd heard. I didn't demand answers or manufacture confrontations. Laura had already shown me all I needed to know. Her truth hadn't been spoken to me. It had been spoken around me, through her voice in another room, to someone else who held her affection. So I made a decision. Not to react, but to retreat. And that retreat began with silence. The next morning, I didn't linger in the kitchen. I didn't ask what her day looked like or offer to walk her to the car. I just nodded when she told me she'd be late, said, "Okay," without looking up, and returned to reading an article I wasn't actually absorbing. When the door closed behind her, I exhaled slowly, like letting air out of a balloon I'd been gripping too tightly. That day, I began reclaiming space. Not just physical space, but emotional, mental. The version of me who had waited for text messages, who had scanned facial expressions for affection, who had timed conversations carefully to avoid pushing too hard. That version no longer had a role to play. He'd been retired. Instead, I filled the void with intention. I started waking earlier, not because I needed to, but because I could. I'd make coffee before the sun rose, sit in the stillness of our backyard, and listen to the wind slide through the oak trees. That silence became a refuge. It was no longer filled with anticipation or dread. It was clean mine. I took up cooking again, not the shared kind that involved, "What are we in the mood for tonight?" but meals tailored to myself. Spicy, simple, nourishing. I plated each dish with care, not for anyone else's eyes, but because I wanted to remember that I was still worth effort. I ate alone at the table, no longer asking if she'd be home or what time she'd return. Sometimes she'd walk in to the scent of dinner and make a comment in passing, but I didn't respond unless necessary. She noticed. At first, she seemed relieved. My silence was space she didn't have to fill with lies. But it didn't take long for that space to turn into absence, and then into something more unsettling. She began lingering in the rooms I occupied, standing in doorways, sitting on the edge of the couch without saying anything. She asked small questions. Had I seen her keys? Was the internet running slow? Did I know where the water filter replacements were? I answered each one calmly, directly, but without emotional color. No warmth, no edge, just facts. Enough to maintain civility, but nothing else. She stopped locking the bathroom door. She left her phone on the table again, face down but still. Occasionally, she'd offer to grab groceries or ask if I wanted anything from the bakery downtown. I thanked her with the same politeness I'd offer a stranger handing me a receipt. This went on for weeks. She'd leave in the morning, sometimes still dressed in that navy sundress, sometimes in new outfits I hadn't seen before. Sleek, subtle, like someone trying to impress but not wanting to be obvious. Her makeup was more careful. Her hair, freshly styled more often. The effort was visible but no longer aimed at me. And yet, when she returned home each night, she seemed unsettled. She would glance around the kitchen, as if expecting me to ask where she'd been. When I didn't, her posture would stiffen. She'd murmur that she was tired and head upstairs, waiting, perhaps, for me to follow. I never did. One evening, she returned to find me sitting on the floor of my office, surrounded by old records. I had pulled them from the storage closet and spread them across the carpet. Albums we once listened to on Saturday mornings, music we danced to in our first apartment when the rent was due and the power had gone out. She stood there for a moment, as if unsure whether to join me. Then she said, almost too casually, "I forgot how much you love those." I nodded without looking up. I never stopped. Her silence lingered longer than usual. When she finally left the room, I didn't turn around. I simply lifted the needle and let the song begin again. That night, I slept on the far edge of the bed. Her body curled near mine, but there was a gulf between us wider than the mattress could bridge. I heard her breathing, unsteady and shallow. Once, she reached out, her hand grazing the sheet between us, but I didn't move. I let her hand retreat back into her space. She didn't try again. In the following days, she tried other forms of reconnection. She baked a pie, my favorite, one she hadn't made in years. Left a note on the fridge saying, "Thought you might want a slice." I ate it, washed the plate, and never mentioned it. She folded my laundry and set it neatly on my side of the bed. I thanked her, placed the clothes in the drawer, and returned to reading. It became clear she didn't know how to navigate this version of me. I had become unrecognizable, not out of spite or manipulation, but because I had finally stepped out of the story she was still trying to control. There's a kind of power in detachment. Not bitterness, not vengeance, just clarity. And when you carry that clarity, it's disorienting to those who once depended on your confusion. One Saturday morning, she asked if I wanted to go for a walk, just the two of us. It was sunny, quiet, the perfect day for it. I told her I already had plans. I didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. She stood in the doorway for a few seconds longer than she needed to, then walked away. That afternoon, I visited the bookstore alone. I wandered through the aisles slowly, letting my fingers trail the spines. I bought 2 novels and a new journal. I sat at a coffee shop nearby and wrote the first entry in months. I am no longer waiting. Felt strange to write it, but stranger still was how deeply I meant it. That night, Laura returned home late. I didn't ask where she'd been. She didn't offer. We moved around each other like quiet planets in orbit, still held by gravity, but no longer connected by warmth. And it was then, in the silence of that evening, that I realized. She had lost me. Not in some grand, explosive way, but in the way a shoreline erodes, slowly, invisibly, until one day the ground is just gone. I had become the quiet exit. Not from the house. Not yet. But from the relationship. From the version of myself that clung to her loyalty like a life raft. I didn't know what would come next. Whether I would eventually move out or if she would. Whether there would be a conversation, a breakdown, a resignation. But I did know this. I was no longer afraid of the unknown. Because the unknown was better than living in the half-light of someone else's lies. Detachment doesn't happen all at once. It isn't a switch that flips. It's a quiet, persistent thinning. A gentle peeling back of everything you once extended so freely. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd been giving away until I stopped doing it. And when I did, the balance between us shifted. It was subtle at first. I began to notice how often Laura sought my attention now that I wasn't offering it freely. She hovered in rooms she used to avoid. She began starting conversations again, though she'd lost the rhythm we once shared. Her words often trailed off mid-sentence, as if she no longer trusted her footing. And I listened, nodded, responded, but never reached. My presence had become measured, and my silence carried a weight it hadn't before. She started cooking more, meals I hadn't tasted in years. I'd return home to the smell of garlic and rosemary, to candlelit tables, to Spotify playlists we once made together playing softly in the background. It all felt curated, as if she were staging a memory she hoped I'd slip back into. But I'd already stepped out of that photograph. Each evening felt more like a performance. Her gestures were deliberate, placing her hand a little too close to mine, laughing just a beat too long, glancing at me as if waiting for me to react. I didn't. Not out of cruelty, but because I had no reason to. I'd given her everything once. Attention, devotion, my vulnerability. And when she no longer valued it, I had learned to reclaim it. Now she was offering back pieces of herself, but they came too late, and they weren't the parts one needed. I saw it in her eyes, the way she searched mine, as if trying to find the version of me that used to plead, explain, soothe. But that version was gone. In his place was a man who had nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done waiting. There was a Sunday afternoon when this realization became unmistakable. We had both ended up in the backyard, unplanned. I was trimming the small lemon tree we'd planted years ago. She sat on the porch with a book open, though I noticed she hadn't turned a page in nearly 15 minutes. The air between us felt still, suspended. Eventually, she said, "You're really quiet these days." I didn't look up. I just said, "I have less to say." She didn't reply, but she didn't leave either. The shift in control wasn't about power, not in the traditional sense. It wasn't about dominating or punishing her. It was about stepping out of the role I'd been boxed into, the passive recipient of her choices, the dependable foundation she thought would always be beneath her feet. I had removed the floorboards, not with noise or fury, but with calm, unshakable clarity. She began texting me again throughout the day. Short messages, little check-ins. "Want me to pick anything up? Thinking about that pasta place we used to like. Did you see the sky this morning?" I replied when appropriate, kindly, respectfully, but never warmly. She started leaving small notes around the house. Not love notes, observations. "Your shirt's in the dryer. There's more coffee." Watered the plant in the study, like she was trying to rebuild a bridge through mundane gestures. But we weren't missing logistics, we were missing trust. And you can't rebuild trust with sticky notes. One evening, I returned home to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, an old photo album in her lap. I recognized the cover instantly. Dark green leather, corners worn, filled with pictures from our early years. She smiled when she saw me and patted the space beside her. I paused in the doorway, then gently said, "Maybe another time," and walked past her to the bathroom. Later that night, the album was gone. I don't know what she expected. To spark some nostalgia that would reset everything? To make me remember why I fell in love with her. But the truth is, I hadn't forgotten. I remembered it all too well. That's what made it impossible to pretend. The absence of her lover, whoever he was, became increasingly obvious. She no longer had the glow she once carried, the breathless quality of someone hiding a thrill. Now she looked tired, tense. Her energy was spent not in joy, but in trying to stitch something back together with fingers that had already unraveled the seams. One night, I overheard her in the bathroom, muffling her sobs into a towel. The sound hit me like a wave, not because I felt guilt, but because I remembered a time when her tears would have shattered me. Now they didn't reach me at all. She'd chosen her path, and I had quietly begged *N to walk away from it. We no longer fought. There was nothing to fight over. The silence between us wasn't a pause. It was an answer, the kind that hums beneath every shallow word, every half-hearted gesture. I began reworking parts of the house. Nothing drastic, just small shifts, rearranging furniture, donating old clothes, cleaning out drawers. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about reclaiming space. I cleared the guest room closet and placed a few of my things there. Books, notebooks, a small lamp. A transitional space, I told myself. One that was only mine. She noticed, of course. One morning, she stood in the doorway of that room and asked what I was doing. I looked up from the bookshelf and simply said, Making room. She nodded once, then turned and walked away. That weekend, I drove to the edge of the city. There was a hiking trail I used to visit before we met. It led to a small ridge that overlooked a dry creek bed, surrounded by junipers. I hiked to the top, sat alone, and let the wind press against my back. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd abandoned in pursuit of partnership, in the name of compromise, in the hope of being chosen again and again. But now I chose myself. Laura's shift was more visible by the day. She started dressing down at home, wearing the soft clothes she used to lounge in. The makeup stopped. Her hair, once perfectly styled, now hung loosely. She stopped talking about her late nights or meetings. The lies had run out of energy. Now there was only her, and the quiet realization that the man who once waited by the door no longer looked in her direction. There's a cost to infidelity that isn't spoken about often, the way it robs the betrayer of their audience. When the person they betrayed no longer cares, their performance loses purpose. And without purpose, there's only the echo of their choices. She had given herself to someone else, perhaps more than once. But what she hadn't anticipated was that the real loss wouldn't be my anger. It would be my absence. Not my physical absence. Not yet. But the absence of the man who once reached for her hand in the dark, who once fought for her attention, who once believed that love meant never giving up. I was still in the house, but she knew and I knew. I was already gone. The silence between us became a mirror. Laura, once so composed in her distance, began to falter in mine. She lingered at my doorway at night, her eyes heavy with something unspoken. Her hand would rest on the edge of the bed, almost reaching. Once, I heard her crying, quiet, restrained, like someone hoping not to be heard but needing to be noticed. I didn't move. I didn't speak. She had long taught me that my touch was unwelcome. Now, her "don't touch me" had transformed into a silent, aching, "please don't ignore me." But I no longer had anything left to give. I had already detached, piece by piece, and she was only just realizing what she'd lost. Not to someone else, but to her own choices. Loneliness wasn't new to me. I had lived in it quietly for months. But to her, it arrived like a storm, sudden, merciless, and deserved. I stopped waiting for closure. I didn't need an apology or an explanation. Her effort